Hey there, welcome back to Brad's Labs. So unfortunately we do have to have a disclaimer on today's video as well, as next week's video will have one as well, but if you are squeamish, do have problems with defleshing or skeletal remains, be sure to check out the video that's going to be posted right here. But today we're going to be looking at a skull on a spike, but it's more to it than just that. This is just the most catching thing that I could actually create myself. So yeah, if you like the video, please give us a share, like, subscribe. It does help. And let's go ahead and get into it. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a story. And you can close your eyes if you would like. It does one of two things. One, it might help you imagine what I'm trying to explain to you better. Or two, you just don't have to look at my face. But I want you to imagine that you're walking through a field and there's a low, heavy hanging fog. And you know that there's some water in front of you. And as you approach the water's edge, you take and you look out, and just above the water line, there are two skulls that are just above it, staring at you. Now, I don't know what you would have done, but me personally, I would have turned around and ran away from there as fast as possible because I like my head where it's at currently. But that very well might have been the site that somebody came across in 5800 BCE. There was a site in Sweden, it's called Kanaljorden, and the site itself, it was uncovered when they were actually trying to build a railroad. And that's funny enough how a lot of archaeological sites are actually discovered is motorways, railroads, housing developments. But that's a story for another time. But the site itself has a lot of interesting features to it, one of them being a skull on a spike. So now that the mood has been set and the candles are on and the lights are down low, let's talk about what the site itself would have looked like. So we know that the site was an open air body of water that had reed marshes, and there was a stone platform that had been constructed underneath the water. The platform was constructed about 2 meters off of the shoreline and about 0.5 to 2 meters in depth from the top of the water. And the platform itself was made of stone and wood. And the stones were about 20 to 60 centimeters in size, and they were laid in a 14 by 14 meter square. And we know that there was another structure that was on top of that that was made of wood, but we don't know the exact size of that structure. Most of it hasn't survived. But it's believed that that would have, they were to place some artifacts here and there. But we're going to get into the artifacts in a second. So now let's talk about the artifacts that were recovered from the site. The site itself is considered a burial ground, so that means that we find artifacts that are often associated with burials, such as human skeletal remains, animal remains, foodstuffs, and tools. The foodstuffs, it was mushrooms and berries, so that was simple enough. The animal remains are great in number. There were brown bears, roe deer, red deer, elk, beaver, boar, badger, and pikes. That took me several tries to get it. I'm fine and glad I got that one. But the tools themselves, more notably for the bone tools, were shaft-holed pickaxes, and for the flint tools were round-butted axes. Now, the animals, there's two animals of note that were deposited along with the rest of the artifacts, and that is of the brown bear and deer. There was a whole brown bear and a deer that were deposited into the water. So you can only try to figure out how they managed to do that one. So now let's talk about the fun stuff, the human skeletal remains. So at the site, they found one full skeletal remain and 30 disarticulated bones. These full skeletal remains are that of an infant, and they aren't found articulated. This implies that the body itself was deposited into the water and not put onto a wooden structure or some sort of structure. And when the body decomposed, this meant that the bones just kind of fell into a small pile. But of the 30 disarticulated bones, there are several skulls that were recovered. And two of the skulls show absolutely no signs of defleshing or cut marks or any of those things. So this implies that the skulls themselves were either already buried and then exhumed and deposited here, or they were set out for a initial burial in an open air, and then they were taken from that and then deposited into the water. But there was another set of skulls that don't follow this at all. One set actually showed signs of possible scalping. There was a cut mark that was right about where your hat would sit. And then the other skull itself still had brain matter on the inside of it, meaning that it was deposited into the water relatively fast after having, been lopped off somebody's shoulders. And that one, they didn't recover a mandible, which is the jaw, or the cervical vertebrae. So this implies that those were removed before they deposited the skull into the water. But the two skulls that were really standing out are the ones that had the stakes in them. One of the stakes was recovered in full, and it was 47 centimeters long. Now, the stakes themselves were actually inserted where the spinal column meets the skull. So there's this hole where your spinal cord gets to go up and talk to your brain. And what they found was that the stake was actually inserted directly in all the way up, so that when it was sat, it looked something kind of like this. Creepy as all hell. So the big question we need to ask ourselves is, why would people go through all the trouble of finding the stones, building the platform, gathering the wood, and constructing a wooden platform to display skulls on spikes? And there's not really a simple answer for that. But what we have found is that the skulls themselves actually belong to both men and women. And there are signs of blunt force trauma on both the back of the skull and the top of the skulls. And this could mean that there was warfare. It could mean that there was intertribal disputes. It could mean that there was spousal abuse. It's not really clear. Yet again, we don't have a time machine, so we can't go back in time and find out. That would make this job so much easier. But we don't have that, unfortunately, so we have to go off of what we know. And we do know that warfare was actually present, and in hunter-gatherer societies all around the globe, warfare has always played a larger part of, culture. You got limited resources, and you have to take and defend them. So it is very quite possible that putting the skulls on the spike was a way to deter people from coming into your area. Like I said, we don't really know, and that's unfortunate, but we can speculate. And I personally like to think of the idea of these being boundary lines, and gets the message across pretty well, if you ask me. So before I leave you today, I want to ask you a question that was once asked of a class that I was in. And it was, how violent do you think that the Paleolithic and Mesolithic time periods were? And I'm only asking about those two because during the Neolithic, we have direct signs of warfare. But we tend to romanticize, hunter-gatherers. We tend to romanticize our ancestors. We tend to think that they were peaceful and that, everybody wanted to live together with roses in their hair. But if you ask me, I don't think that we were always peaceful. I think that, since the time humans rocked up on the face of this earth, we have just been out to destroy and destroy and destroy. And I want you to take and think about that question and either answer down in the comments below or go onto social media, ask your friends the question. Get people thinking about it. But I'd like to thank you for joining us today and talking about this conversation with, skulls on a spike. If you did enjoy the video, please do give us a like, share, and a subscribe. It does help the video. It does help the channel. And if you would like, you could become a patron for $1. We do extra videos. The video this week, we're actually going to be doing something with Megan, and she is putting together an artifact inside of a sand enclosure, I guess the best way to place it. I'm going to break open that enclosure, and I'm going to see if I can identify the artifact on camera. So if you'd like to see that, become a patron. But I hope you guys do have a wonderful day.